Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our December 13th, 2021 regular meeting of the New Albany Plain Local Schools Board of Education. It's our last meeting of this calendar year. Call the meeting to order. Request a roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff.
Here.
Mr. Darrow.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Vice President Kalinowski. Here. President McCollum.
Here.
Wishful thinking.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members have had the opportunity to review meeting minutes from our November 15th regular meeting. If there aren't any changes, can I have a motion to approve those board minutes?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Newmoff, second by Mr. Bush. Roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Mr. Darrow.
Yes.
Vice President Kalinowski. Yes. President McCollum.
Yes. Now to tonight's agenda. Any additions or corrections?
Thank you.
If none, can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Mr. Darrow, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bush. Roll call, please.
Mr. Darrow.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Vice President Kalinowski. Yes. President McCollum.
Yes. First item tonight is public participation. We have 3 individuals who have registered to speak. Just real quickly, again, when I call your name, please come up to the podium, state your name, address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Our first speaker this evening is Mr. Joel Miller.
Hi, I'm Joel Miller. I live at 7067 Fernridge Drive here in New Albany. Am I allowed to ask some questions during this, or is this just kind of a?
This is your chance to address the board.
Okay, okay.
You can ask questions. We will have to get back to you some other point in time.
Got it, got it. Can I confirm that I heard right in the last meeting that we're doing an end to the mask mandate here this month on the 17th or so? Was that from the last meeting? I imagine that's what happened. I guess what I wanted to ask, about that is, I also kind of wanted to confirm if what I heard was true, that Mr. Sawyers had said that the data that we had showed that there was no significant decrease in transmission as a result of pre-mask mandate versus post-mandate, mask mandate. As such, I appreciate, the board understanding that. I understand you want to give time for people to become vaccinated, but acknowledging that there isn't a statistical difference between the two, seems to prove that masks were ineffective, especially cloth masks. Which is what we've talked about a lot here. I did hear Mr. Darrow speak, about keeping the masks in place, knowing that they don't work, creating a negative, potentially negative side effects for children. And so I would like to just speak and say, I'm a little disappointed that in knowing that they don't work, or at least statistically knowing that they don't work, that you're continuing to hold on to the mask mandate. I understand the concept of saying, well, if we're giving time for people to become vaccinated. And not to be on my high horse too much here, but all the people who have come up here spoken about mask mandates and how they need to be implemented to stop the spread. I'd hope they look at the actual statistics here in the school that showed that they did not have an effect. They did not reduce transmission. And as a hazmat chemist, I know a little bit about it. So, this forcing our kids to wear masks for this time has had some negative effects. One of my children was behind in reading, and I think a lot of that is because people were covered with their masks, and they couldn't, visually pick up on the words and stuff that people are saying as they're learning how to speak and learning how how to write and do that sort of things. So I appreciate that it's ending. I wish it would have ended sooner. So anyways, thank you for ending, ultimately is what I'm trying to say. Also, you know, and I'm sure you guys know, you're hearing, you know, in the news about the Supreme Court's ruling against these mandates. You know, I fully believe that a lot of these mandates are going to be proven illegal as there's been initial injunction against them. So I think as a board, you know, and as a community, we need to be careful about, you know, what we think we can do legally, especially with this being such a heated topic on both sides. The other reason I'm here to talk is, you know, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Sawyers. He met with me about a month ago for disturbing issues that I was hearing were going on in our schools regarding the teaching of LGBTQ plus issues to 7th grade students. I understand, and I got to witness a video that was shown to the 7th graders, basically, in my opinion, you know, promoting sexual preference to kids that are trying to identify or find a way to fit in. I know it's not the intent of the school necessarily, but you know, 7th graders are highly influential. And so if you form a group and you push that narrative into a group, even though you're trying to supposedly make things more inclusive and more diverse, which I don't understand was a problem to begin with, you're creating adults talking to children, and those that are confused, trying to figure themselves out, are now that may try to fit in. You've created a group for them that they may join out of, you know, a feeling of
You have 1 minute remaining.
thank you, out of a feeling of wanting to belong to something. So I think it has to be very, very careful. In fact, I don't think the school has any business in teaching sexuality to our kids, even if it's under the cloud of inclusion and diversity. Inclusion and diversity can be taught without teaching about sexual preference. And it's also my understanding that an outside group, New Albany Pride, was involved in making the video. I haven't fully confirmed that yet. In which, you know, a male adult, openly, from what I understand, homosexual teacher was asking kids to go to their meetings without involving the parents, without telling them to go to their parents or the guidance counselors if they felt confused, but asking them to come to their meetings that are based strictly on sexual identity. You know, this is the danger with teaching things supposedly in order to make things more diverse and inclusive. And again, there is no end game to that. You know, is there a certain number of people that have to be a certain way in order to meet a goal to say we are now diverse and inclusive? Is that my time? Anyways, a lot more to say, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming. Next is Jeremy Mabel.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Mabel, and I live at 6993 Cunningham Drive. I'm the father of 2 students in our district. I have a daughter in the primary school and a daughter in pre-K at the ELC. I, like you, would like to continue to have our students in school for in-person instruction with our wonderful teachers in our district. I would like to thank you for keeping a universal masking policy for pre-K through 6th grade for the rest of the calendar year. This has allowed parents enough time to get our 5+-year-olds vaccinated prior to elimination of this policy, I guess, at the end of the week. I would like to remind you that not all the students in our district are 5 years old and thus eligible to be vaccinated. We have a building with hundreds of students that are too young to be vaccinated. I would like to remind you that the CDC's most recent updated position on guidance for COVID-19 prevention in K-12 schools, which occurred on November the 5th, it still recommends universal indoor masking by all students, staff, teachers, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of their vaccination status. While I and the CDC would much prefer a universal masking policy throughout the district, I'm here tonight to at least ask you to extend the universal masking policy for all students at the ELC until such time that all of our students in our buildings are eligible to be vaccinated. Thank you. And with that, I'd love to see my 4-year-old before she goes to bed here. So, thank you. Have a good evening.
Our last person this evening is Trisha Bott.
Trisha Bott, 7039 Dean Farm Road. President McClellan, Vice President Kalinowski, members of the board, Superintendent Sawyers, thanks for the opportunity. I have comments regarding the mandated masking and high school curriculum transparency. Regarding the former, we've heard a lot of science presentations about masks and so forth and COVID, and I hadn't heard many teacher perspectives. And so I was asking a friend and teacher who lives in New Albany about her experience as a teacher, and her 8th grade social studies class is masked in another district. And her observation is that in 20 plus years of teaching, she's never seen such a hazard to the classroom environment. Kids don't talk to her or one another. If they do venture to speak, she often has to ask for clarification as the masks affect clarity. She can't assess the student's wellness based on how they're like, do they have a bruise under their mask? Are they happy or sad? She can't really guide them with nonverbal cues when she sees them going astray socially. And she feels like it also hides smiles of encouragement that could be part of students' healing process during this time. Last meeting, I heard you say you went out of the masking business, and I think that's awesome and want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think a great way to get out of the masking business is to get out of the COVID business. That means that opting out of any and all COVID-related interventions that are not legally ordered by the Public Health Department. That includes all data gathering, tracking, reporting, collaborating with public health schools. It's great and wonderful information, but we have so many other wonderful things to do with our time and resources. It'd be great to see that focused on education. In regards to younger people and masks and vaccinations, I just wanted to share the ACE2 receptors that are used for the COVID SARS virus to get into the body. They're much less in the young aged, and they don't express its process and allow viral replication. There's a reason we don't see much severe COVID in that age group. So just wanted to add that in. And then regarding back to curriculum, I just found it a struggle to really see what resources are being used. I'd love to see some policies regarding curriculum where a syllabus is posted and where the resources are available, not after a class happens, but a quarter before, a week before, so that parents can be involved in their students' educational process. Thank you for the time to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming. Next item on the agenda tonight is communications to the board, starting with superintendent's items. Mr. Sawyers.
President McClellan, members of the Board of Education, I just want to do a couple of reminders. The first is winter recess begins Saturday, December 18th through Monday, January 3rd. Monday, January 3rd is Professional Development Day for teachers and classified non-teaching employees within our school district. Kids come back on Tuesday, January 4th. The school district calendar is actually posted on our district website under departments, operations. It's very easily, readily accessible. So just want to remind families, because we got a few phone calls today in the office about when do kids come back to school. The answer is Tuesday, January 4th. Recess officially begins this Saturday. The second is we've posted future school year calendars on our district website. We've opened them up for public commentary for the next 3 additional school years beyond 2022-23. We've posted 3 additional school years to allow for 4 future school year calendars to be visible by families. Pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, we will actually convene a public hearing in January once the board establishes its meeting calendar at your organizational meeting, probably the latter part of January, to actually do the public hearing on future school year calendars to basically allow for the public input process to come to a conclusion. The portal that's open on our website to collect anonymous parent feedback, staff feedback, or student feedback is valid through Monday, December 27th. So if anyone would like to offer commentary, we have plus or minus 100 respondents so far. 2 future school year calendars, you're welcome to do so before the end of December on our website. I'll reserve my other comments for other sections of the agenda. Thank you.
All right. So that brings up our enrollment projection reports.
And we're going to ask Tracy Healy to come forward. She's with Future Strength. I think she completed the enrollment projection report for us, and she's going to share it with you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. Talk through the enrollment projections. I'm gonna pull it up. Perfect. See some of the data that we're going to go through.
My, if I keep spinning, wait.
Oh, that's okay.
It was spinning.
You have the report. I know that you there. You go. We expect this up. So in terms of looking at the enrollment projections, we look at a number of variables in terms of historical enrollment, birth data, housing data, etc. As in terms of what we've seen in the past as an indicator of the future, and then also identifying potential new housing growth based on the housing estimates and other information available from the county and local building departments. Go to the next slide, please. So historical enrollment, we were up 10% over the last 10 years at just over 5,100 students, an increase of 454 students over that period of time. Vast majority of that increase, however, has been at the high school level. When it switched to the next slide, you can take a look at kind of the breakdown. At the pre-K, K, we're up 157 due primarily to the inclusion of the pre-K there. At grades 1 through 8, we're down slightly in terms of those numbers. And as I mentioned, we're up almost 400 students in grades 9 through 12. So what we're seeing is kind of a lower class sizes in terms of moving through. Now, of course, with last year, it's just not a good year for a lot of reasons, but in terms of enrollment, we saw, there really aren't any districts that weren't impacted with a lower enrollment that I've run across all around the country. So kind of thrown that out as kind of an anomaly. And then this year we've seen a little bit of pickup, but it still isn't at where we'd expect it to be in terms of current enrollment. However, take a look at the next slide. Did the projections back in 2018, we were still within 61 students overall, pre-K through 12. So I was pretty happy with that accuracy over 4-year projection and a pandemic. So we still landed up pretty good. So again, in terms of that, there isn't a huge amount of change from what we've seen as we look at the potential projections moving forward. In terms of birth counts, we use that as an indicator of future K. So we look at the number of births in the area based on zip code, which is the best way we can get at districts that aren't coterminous with the city or county boundary. So we look at the surrounding zip codes, get an idea of what the pool of students are as our potential kindergartners 5 to 6 years later, and take a look at that. So you can see on this chart, it had been pretty consistent, in those middle years. We're right around 1,100 in terms of the number of births that we're using. This 2020, because it was 2020, this first year we saw a decline as well of about 100 students. And across the country, as well as in the state of Ohio, we saw a 4% decline in births for 2020. There was a lot of speculation that because people were quarantined and spending lots of time at home, that we would see an increase, and it was actually the complete opposite. So not what we had typically seen, like in a blackout or when there's bad winter or that sort of thing. So that was just yet another anomaly of 2020. So the birth counts, you can see that we have all of those that kind of touch your boundary to some degree, but then we've only used 43054 and 43081 in terms of what, kind of the best number of zip codes. And that's really kind of based on that map that you'd see on page 13 in the report. I don't have it here in the slide, and that's really where the majority of the students are coming from, is that 54 zip code. We also take a look at just some general demographics, what's happening in terms of total population overall. So we're looking at Columbus and Albany, Plain Township, obviously seeing huge increases in population from the 2010 to 2020 census, which isn't anything you guys all don't know, but good to have it down here. Next slide shows based on census block groups, we purchased data from Esri, which is the company that provides ArcGIS and other geographic information system software. And they put together, based on the census data, labor and statistics data, postal codes, kind of a whole host of sources of data to look at a population estimate for the current year, as well as a population projection for 5 years. So I can use this data to inform my projections. They're not just student projections, they're overall population projections. And then they would also, of course, include students who attend non-public or other, sources or other schools not in a public school system. But again, so we're seeing, based on that, an increase of about 310 students or children ages 0 through 18 over that 5-year window is what Esri has projected. We take a look, and then they also have some population, or I'm sorry, some economic and household income, as well as average family size and total family households. Average family size is projected to remain about the same at just 3.41, and total family households is projected to increase by about 11% over that 5-year period. So again, looking at what we can see in potential new housing growth, additional households as well. Take a look at the map, just shows where overall population, so this is total population growth and decline over that 5-year period. The areas with dark green are projected to increase over 15% over that 5-year window. The lighter green is between 10 and 15%. And then the yellow is between 5 and 10%. And then the orange in the northwest corner is from 0 to 5%. We're seeing growth all across the board in terms of that. Then the next map shows by school age population, so those ages 5 to 18. We see a few areas of decline in the red and orange in the southern central part of the district, and as well as the northeast portion. And again, these are based on those Esri overall projections for population growth, ages 5 to 18. Okay. In terms of building permits is another area that we look at closely. This shows the number of single family building permits on this chart. So we've seen, kind of peaks in 2014-15 in New Albany, and then fairly steady around 40 to 50 single family building permits per year in the village. On the next one, we've seen multifamily. So obviously Columbus has had lots of fluctuation in terms of the number of multifamily units. New Albany really only had in 2013 the 29 units. We back that. So we want to take a look at that in terms of what have we seen in growth, and then what has the growth been in terms of student population as we're looking at the number of new single and multifamily units. We also look at the housing unit estimates that the city of New Albany puts out. Currently, there are just over 3,700 units built. We have 321 units currently planned, just under 2,000 units entitled. So for a total of just under 6,000 total units, so about 2,300 either planned or entitled, so yet to be developed. Additionally, that was not the Homewood property was not included in this list, but they said the city But there's a potential of about 63 single-family units based on that. It's a 3-acre parcel. So based on the current density recommendations, there could be 1 unit per acre. So potential 63 acres. We also took a look at Little Turtle because there's some questions about what's in Columbus, what's in New Albany, where are these things. So there are 140 units we found that were actually within the district in Little Turtle development. Okay, so the survival ratios, this is just a measure of the historical enrollment grade to grade year by year. So we look at the number of kindergartners last year versus the number of kindergartners for this year, or first graders this year. And so we do that across the grades, grade by grade, year by year, to get an idea of what the in and out migration is of students. So the average survival ratios for all the grades, with the exception of 4, 5, 8, 9, and 11, 12, all exceed 100%. So meaning that all the other grades increase in enrollment grade. So we have more students in 3rd grade than we had in 2nd grade last year, and et cetera. So again, just showing where, there's still, even though I said we're seeing some downturns slightly over that 10-year period, each class level, with the exception of those 3, are increasing in the number of students.
How do you reconcile that?
Excuse me?
How do you reconcile that the each class is bigger than the class before, but there are some declines?
Right. Well, mainly because there's been lower kindergarten. So even as those, they're still gaining as they move forward, but we're starting with a smaller kindergarten class than we had previous years in a lot of cases. So that's primarily where that is. If we look back at historical enrollment page, for example, kindergarten started at 327 in 2012-13, declined, went back up, declined, went back up, went up, then has declined the last 3 years. So that primarily has been the indicator. We're looking at
Wouldn't that lead to smaller classes in the subsequent year?
Well, no, when you're saying why have we seen some decline in that?
No, I said, how do you reconcile that each class is bigger than the one before, yet there have been declines in classes?
Is it a decline in the projected enrollment number, not the actual enrollment?
Right, no, but as we've looked, yeah, I mean, overall, we've seen increases grade to grade, year to year in the enrollment. What I mentioned earlier is though that from 2012-13 to today, we've seen a little bit of decline in the grades 1 through 8. So, and that's just a result of some of those lower kindergarten classes moving through the system like 5 years ago.
Not seeing a decline in the number of students overall.
Overall.
We're still increasing in enrollment.
Right.
But when she's looking back at what was projected, or no, actually in kindergarten, what we actually got.
What we have, it's been slower.
It seemed contradictory, so I didn't. Still not entirely following, but let's keep moving.
Okay. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Okay, let's move on. So we put together 3 sets of projections, high, moderate, and low projection. The moderate projection shows an increase of 380 students over the 10-year period. You can take a look at how that breaks out by the grade levels. So the moderate projections by grade group, you can see how those break out. So we see an increase from pre-K to in K up from 484 to 548, an increase from the grades 1 through 3 from 1092 to 1215, an increase from 1,117 in grades 4 through 6 to just over 1,200, 7 to 8, we've seen an increase of about 109 students per time, and then 9 through 12 from 1657 up to 1649. So what we're seeing again, because of this lower class sizes moving through high school, is really going to be flat. So kind of, we've seen that increase, and now that bubble has worked its way through the system, and we'll have more of a flat enrollment at the high school level based on the moderate. The low projections on the next slide show a decrease of 38 students, or less than 1% over that 10-year period. So again, looking at, there's really nothing happening in terms of housing. We see kind of another bust. There's higher inflation, higher interest rates. It's kind of the scenario for the low projection, showing a really flat enrollment over the 10-year period. And then we can skip to the next slide and go to the high projections, indicating an increase of 793 students. So again, if we have low interest rates, more of a housing boom than what we've seen currently, and really, greater projections in terms of the high. So pre-K K would be at 549, grades 1 through 3 would be at 1258, 4 to 6 would be at 1293, 7 to 8 would be at 956, and then we would see an increase at the high school level of to 1847. So just under 200 students there based on the high projection. What we've used in the past and what we've recommended is the moderate projection based on current conditions continuing forward, building new housing permits within the village at around 60, and that 50 to 60 new single family units per year. Welcome questions. I know I threw a lot of data at you.
So we've had some conversations, we've started some of these conversations with the city and the township, as at a larger scale as to what is expected in this quadrant of Franklin County over the next few years.
Sure.
And I know that in conversation with the city, that there's an expectation that there's going to be over the next 10 years, I know this is only a few, the potential for some fairly significant growth. They're expecting a lot. When you do these projections, are you talking with any of these other organizations and getting some of their feedback?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing then that because there are parts of the city of New Albany and the 43054 area code that aren't in the school district.
Right.
So what you would say in that case would be that there are areas of 43054 that could be growing, but are not necessarily going to be an impact on us, which is why we may still have a moderate enrollment growth, because it would seem to me that given what I'm hearing about people saying, we're at 12,000 now, we're going to be at 16 or 18,000 in 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of kids potentially coming out of that. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at this the right way.
Right. And that's really why too, we've provided a range of the projections based on, like really the moderate is assuming that, what we've seen and where we've been is, kind of continuing where we'll be for future housing growth, where the high projection takes into account, well, okay, is all this stuff going to happen all at once and within the 10 years? We haven't seen that to date, but, that could happen. And so, again, it becomes important to watch too, the projections as compared to actual enrollment in these next couple of years. If we do start to see more housing coming on quicker than expected, then, we want to say, oh, well, maybe we should be looking toward the high in terms of that, or maybe we need to revise based on some new data coming in. But based on what we know today and taking all of those things into account, that's where we've landed.
And I think it's every like 2 years that we will revisit this with you.
Three.
Normally
We didn't do it
pre-COVID.
last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, because it wouldn't have been worth it. No one did projections last year. I was a little slow.
There was that pandemic.
Yes.
So I guess to So we're not necessarily in a position where, given all the chatter that we're hearing, that we need to be thinking, we always need to be thinking ahead.
Sure.
But what, again, looking, in the trend lines, and I know, I'm sure, you're the finance guy, you can talk about trend lines, but what we've seen is pretty moderate. So it's fair to say that the moderate would continue, at least for the foreseeable future. But again, needing to look at it in a couple of years to see what changes.
Actually, we've used, with the exception of the high school, to Tracy's point, low, because of the declining enrollment grades 1 through 8. And I think it's just how, COVID happened, it changed everything. But even prior to COVID, we were looking at low when we go into staffing, just to try to understand what we do or don't have liability for to properly staff the school district with human resources called teachers necessary to meet the number of kids in a specific grade level that's projected. And then every now and again, and last time it happened was 3 years ago, 23 third graders move in August. You can never predict that that's going to happen. Statistically, the odds of that are just not going to happen, but it happened. So we added another third grade section late because we didn't predict that all these people would move in. Normally they're sprinkled across the grade levels and you have a little bit of flexibility dominantly in grades 1 through 6. Middle school scheduling is a little bit different, just like the high school, but in 1 through really kindergarten through 6, or even preschool through 6, you have a little bit of room to basically account for some move-ins. But when you get a bubble, that's what's happened. To Tracy's point, there's certain pockets of bubble groups that have moved through the school district that are now all sitting at the same time at New Albany High School. So enrollment is up at the high school because the bubble groups have all ended up in grades 9 through 12. That's just the reality of what happened. So we look at that, and John, where you went, and it's important because it reinforces the need for dialogue with the city, is to understand, and the city's wonderful as far as the collaboration, we all know that, but to understand the impact of the school district, and they're very strategic, and the type of development they're going to approve, when and how, to understand its impact to the school district beyond just 43054 and what's contiguous to a geographical boundary of the school versus the current request. And I'll use it because it's an ongoing conversation with the city that we've recently had. When Facebook and Google and Amgen come to the table, they're recruiting people that work at Meta, which is now Facebook's now Meta, but Meta, Google, and Amgen just broke ground, who have people that are going to work at the research facility or the manufacturing plant that want housing that is tied to New Albany Plain local schools. Well, that is an ongoing conversation to then talk to the city. Amgen's fully operational within 2 years, research center to follow. Then what does that mean in the housing development conversation that then comes back to Tracy's point about the impact on enrollment numbers? And what does that do to our school district? Because technically the campus was built, and Mike most recently asked me this question as a board member, for 5,500 kids after we opened the now intermediate school, because when it was built, it was called the K-8 Learning Center, I think is what its name was. Now it's the intermediate school based upon redistricting, but we house 5,500 comfortably without using hallways and closets and transformed areas that are not classrooms for different types of programs. The high school is always a conversation point, just because right now it's over 1,600. It's large. We're at capacity, but at the same time, we're not using all the physical spaces every single period of the day at the high school. So then that becomes a conversation point that we have to understand as to what does that mean. It's not the same as an elementary classroom where you have 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, whatever the number is in a specific classroom right now, that are assigned to that room all day, that might change departmentally to leave Mrs. Mackey to go to Mr. Bush, from ELA to mathematics or social studies or science, but they're just changing kids in a classroom. So you've still got 24 to 26 kids that are going to be in that classroom all day long, the entire day that they're there. Unlike the high school, they're in a room 5 periods a day. So you have real estate at the high school that's not used every period. So that leads into a different type of conversation about what that means, because using the intermediate school as the example, it's built to house no more than 1,200 kids comfortably and wisely. Doesn't mean we couldn't figure something out, but it's really built for 1,200, just like the primary school is, because they're the exact same 150,000 square foot building. They just geographically look different. The ELC is built for 600 comfortably, and Tracy's enrollment projections, and we chose to add preschool. If we would ever get in a pinch, there's opportunities there for future conversation. But it goes back to the conversations with the city to be planful and responsible, to understand what's coming on when in the pipeline. And you'll remember when we started talking about Little Turtle is not the city of New Albany. That was a whole different liability for us, that we said there could be 200 kids overnight out of Little Turtle because there's 144 units. And when you look at the map, and John's been detective to go actually meet with Little Turtle to get the physical map of the complex, because it's really interesting to figure out which buildings are ours. And then the ones that are split, where the bedrooms are, because the master bedroom in the unit determines which side of the parking lot it's on. So that's how that works. So even if your house is split on a lot that is half New Albany, half Columbus, you will determine your school district of residence by the master bedroom. Where is the master bedroom? That is how your school district is determined in the state of Ohio. It's the same for the condominiums, the apartment complexes, because we have this argument all the time with leasing companies that will tell a prospective person coming in to lease the apartment, well, it's called New Albany Arms. I'm making it up. While parents believe we're going to go to the New Albany schools. They sign a lease and then find out, welcome to the Columbus City Schools, because you're on the other side of the parking lot. We actually have apartment complexes out of the 6 that have a divided parking lot, that one side of the parking lot is ours, the other half is not. That is not fun to try to explain that to parents, but we don't make that rule. So I think the conversations that John brought up with the city are essential to try to help us understand the planfulness necessary to accommodate our kids.
Well, and again, I don't want to, this isn't meant to strike fear in anybody's heart or thinking that we're, necessarily banking on the high projections, but you said 5,500, and even I think at the, let me go back and look.
High school, we're over a
Even
little
at the
bit of primary.
Right, even at the moderate projection, we're at basically 5,500 by 2030. It is something that this board, in conversation internally, but also with the city and others, I want the community to know we've already started having these conversations. We will continue to have these conversations about the capacity at our schools, the growth in our community, and what that means for future planning. To Michael's point, I think there's a lot of creativity in the way that we deliver education. We've seen ways that we can deliver education through COVID that may be advantageous in the future. Michael mentioned the fact that there are school buildings that are only used during, or rooms that are being used only portions of the day. I think we can be creative about this, but I also think that, the conversation about our buildings, how they're being used, the best way to use them, whether or not there is any need for future buildings, is a conversation that we're going to continue to have between now and probably every 2 years when you come to see us.
Okay.
Couple of questions. Let's see. What percentage of new move-ins, do we know what percentage of people who move in here actually send their kids to New Albany versus to the private school? Do you have data on that?
I do not have that data.
So without that data, how, I mean, your projections have been fairly accurate, but without that data, how is it that you're able to, how does your model take into account that piece of information?
Well, going to the chart that you didn't like, that survival ratio chart, that measure, by measuring the in and out movement of students, grade by grade, year to year, takes into account those children that are either homeschooled or going to a private or parochial school or moving out of the district or within the district. So that's how the model takes it into account. It's not very easy to get that data in terms of non-public student enrollment because you're reliant The ODE doesn't provide it in a way that shows school residents versus school attending. So you're reliant on the private schools to give you that data, and they're not necessarily as cooperative as one might hope. And that's true everywhere. I'm not saying that. I mean, you can base it on transportation, which some districts will look at, well, who do we transport? But you don't transport everyone, so it's not completely accurate data. So
You have 3 projections, low, moderate, high. Does your model produce essentially an infinite number of projections, and you pick then from the from the high, the low, and the middle, and present those? So I'm used to seeing on in business scenarios, in investment scenarios, where the projections follow what they refer to as a Monte Carlo methodology. It basically just runs infinite permutations of the data set and comes up with these ranges. Does yours do that, or do you run very discrete, 3 discrete profiles and that's it?
I run 3 profiles, and then I modify those profiles based on what we learn in terms of housing and what's projected in terms of housing data, what we've seen in terms of student yield based on new housing. And so I could come up with an infinite number if I wanted to, but I would need to manually generate those. So what I come up with are 3 high, moderate, and low based on that survival ratio page and within a standard deviation of different, like what the high is set at, what the moderate is set at, what the low is set
And then
at.
you use your judgment to modify the variables to come up with those 3 different. Okay. Yeah, so you could do infinite,
But I'm not
then
going
you
to.
would spend
You don't want to pay
infinite time doing
me
that.
to do an infinite number.
Can I
Yeah.
jump in on that?
Please.
So when you look at or you go from the low, moderate to the high, obviously there's 3 key variables, right? It's birth rate, it's move-in rate, and it's new development. So as you go to the moderate and the high, and so the subjectivity that you're bringing in, what are the leading variables that are causing the moderate and the high growth in those models? Is it one factor over another? Are you kind of playing them all the same? Obviously, I would think birth rate is going to be pretty static across the 3.
Yeah,
So
birth rate has been, and really the survival ratios have been pretty steady over that period of time. So really the variable, that we've been talking about is what the new housing is going to be and how quickly units come on board. So that's the main.
So
that's the main.
the main delta between moderate and high projection is
It's
new.
housing.
It's housing build. It's not us thinking maybe what Michael alluded to, which is, hey, we have Amgen coming and they're going to bring 200 associates that 100 of them want to live in New Albany.
Right, but that would be what generates the new housing. Are
That's
those,
your point.
Yeah, well, it could just bring an influx of a different population set that all of a sudden
yeah,
we have
existing, yeah.
maybe 50% of the households that sell during the year maybe have kids that are replaced with 75% of people that move in have kids.
Okay.
So I'm kind of wondering how that factor is being brought into the models at all.
Yes, really, in terms of putting together the projection ratios, they don't distinguish between whether it's new housing that's generating or it's existing. So my model does, I'm putting it based on what I think I know in terms of the new housing and what we've seen and what we can expect in terms of that. But the model doesn't differentiate between whether, you could say, oh, wait, maybe the new housing isn't coming on as quickly as we thought, but we're still seeing that growth based on, that turnover and people coming in with children buying from those, so, which is, something that's always happening anyway, so which is measured.
And by the way, I don't dislike it. Data is just data. I have no affection for it one way or the other, but the term survival rate, that doesn't refer to whether someone's still alive. It refers to whether they survive from one
From
class.
first grade to second grade.
Just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yes, they survive. superintendent.
And to Mr. McClellan's point, the fact is, on the moderate projection, even under the high projection, we're not looking at a terrible risk to our current facilities for quite a few years, but we're looking at them now. We start the process now, being public and forthright about the fact that it's a possibility and we need to be planning. So that's the bottom line.
The key from our perspective, when Becky and I talk about this, is the ongoing conversations with the city and the township dominantly to understand what's happening from a development perspective, the type of units that are going in, the liability associated to them. Your point about Homewood, and yes, there's 63 acres with 63 potential units. They do 1 unit per acre. But to where Mike went, then understanding, even though there's 140 units that are projected, and I don't know, remember now, and Becky, I don't know that you do either, the total number of units in Market Square related to the apartments and condos, but we get less than 10 kids right now based upon the price point and the size of the unit, like a studio apartment. It was attracted to a different population for sale or rent. So that didn't produce a child liability to us. There's no children amenities, there's no playground, there's no, those types of things didn't create something. Like if you told us tomorrow we're building another Windsor, that's a completely different conversation. We're building another Hampstead, that's a completely different conversation. So those types of conversations with the city matter, because that's when we would have to act differently than in year 9 and 10 of a current projection that we'll update again.
One other thing to Mike's point, the Albany task force that was in place 6-7 years ago, the analysis that was done then already found that New Albany has the highest ratio of residents that have children in the district of any of the Franklin County districts. We were at 33% of households had students in the district versus a Franklin County average of 25%.
We would estimate 35% right now, with 65% not. The closest we can get on private are kids that are requesting transportation services. The charter non-pubs, for deduct purposes, will know eventually how many charter kids there are, because their deduct will come through. But the privates, really, the only thing that we truly find out is if the parent says, am I eligible for transportation? That's how we find out about that private school family. Otherwise, we don't know.
Just to clarify, it's chartered schools. We
Yes,
don't
I'm
find
sorry,
out about the
charter.
charter non-public. That's 2 different communities. Right, community schools are what we would know.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry. On the general demographics, I just want to make sure I understand this chart. It's like slide 8 or something like that.
I have it up.
Yeah, so do I understand that correct, that in 2010, the New Albany population of the city was 7,700, and now it's 10,825,
Mhm.
and the township has grown from 2,000 to 12,000?
You don't have that. I'll double check that.
Only reason I ask is like,
Yeah.
I would be shocked we only grew by
Yeah.
500 students if we had 12,000
More
folks.
people. Yeah. I think guessing it should be 2761.
I think the one's supposed to not be there.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking
Deduct
too.
10,000.
So, yes.
The only reason I ask
Sorry
is,
about that.
you
Yeah,
know,
no.
I'm surprised, based on feeling of the population growth, that it's not higher. The
Hmm.
projections aren't higher, but we're only off by 61 people, so it's pretty impressive.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
you
you.
coming.
All right.
We now have an update from Clee this evening, and it's
Good evening. Just a couple of highlights that teachers are doing across the district. I gave you each one a copy of this. The first one comes from the middle school. Says Einstein once stated, "The world is not destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." The 8th grade class is not standing back and watching, they're taking action. Tara Baker, Carrie Fuller, Lindsay Meisner, and Jess Miller's 8th grade students have been analyzing a novel from a former visiting author. It's Alan Gretzky's Refugee. And as they read this text, the students are asking thoughtful questions and sharing profound perspectives. They're doing a culminating project and they're donating 11 welcome kits to CRIS, which stands for Community Refugee and Immigration Services. And they're grateful for their amazing students and families who have given donations. They're going to continue this drive until Friday, December 17th, right before break. And then the intermediate school classes and a few other classes sprinkled throughout the campus have completed their West African drumming residency with Mr. Diamande. And I can tell you it's fun. I watch Mrs. Lickman wear her whole outfit and drum and dance. It's awesome. But the residency was made possible by generous grants from the Jean B. McCoy Community Center for the Arts. He's a master drummer and he's been working with our students over the past several years. They learned dances, songs, rhythmic drumming patterns from West African culture. And he actually brings a large collection of drums that they use, so they're authentic drums. And then he will return again in February or March to provide this opportunity for the rest of the campus. It'll include probably more of the primary building. So it's really a cool experience. And that's all I have. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much. Discussion items this evening. First, board liaison reports. Anybody have anything to report this evening? And we'll move on. The next item is our 2022 organizational meeting date. We obviously do this at the beginning of every year. We try to do it typically the beginning of January. So the first Monday of January is January 3rd, and no one will be here. So January 10th is the following Monday. I think at one point in time we had talked internally about January 8th. I'm not sure why that date came up, but January 10th is the second Monday of January, and possible we'd have that meeting at 5:30, followed by our first board meeting of the year at 6 o'clock.
When does school start?
4th. So as long as everybody's calendar is good, we will set Monday, January 10th. You good?
Yeah.
Monday, January 10th, 5:30 for our organizational meeting, followed by our first board meeting of the year.
Usually it's just immediately following.
Or immediately following.
That way, if you're done in 10 minutes, you don't have to wait.
Shortly thereafter.
Hey, John,
Yes.
just one on the board liaison reports, just
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
a comment that we've been working with the city and their IDEA committee, and they recently concluded our findings and have made some recommendations to the city that we presented at the council meeting last Tuesday. So the city will be taking those into consideration. There's 11 recommendations that are really intended to impact the community across and including our school community. So the city will be working with those and looking at establishing an IDEA 2.0 committee to continue the work of the IDEA committee. But really a great team to work with, and lots of positive discussion, lots of positive outcomes in this community that I think are absolutely worth continuing and executing on some of the recommendations. I think we'll have some involvement as well going forward.
Good. And thanks for serving on the committee.
Absolutely.
Okay, with our organizational meeting date set, our third item is health and safety update.
It's a slight delay tonight. I don't know why, but I think it's the internet. Or my computer, one of the two.
Mine was slow logging in and booting up stuff.
For whatever reason, it's taken a minute. So it's okay. President McClellan, members of the Board of Education, and our families at home, begin this evening, as I always do, to talk about the statement of purpose within our school district to try to ground us in everything we do every single day, to create a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic developmental outcomes for each student. Our goal, as I've stated since really the first school, is that we have safe, supportive, and connected in-person learning across our entire school campus for the entire school year. Knock on wood, so far, we are on track for that. I will be honest and tell you, kids have already started talking to me and candidly, a few staff members about, ice cubes in the toilet, spoons under your pillow. They want calamity days. They were very disappointed it didn't snow. We had a trace of snow. They wanted a foot of snow. But our intent is still to have campus open every single day. Yes, it is possible that we will actually have calamity days this year, depending on the weather, but no, it has not happened yet. On November 15th, we adopted a board resolution. This is the truncated version of the entire resolution to try to hit a few main points. In the resolution, based upon what was happening, we did remind families, as we've stated from the very beginning, that if you're eligible, please consult your medical provider to consider getting vaccinated. Masks are required for students in grades pre-K through 6 through this Friday, December 17th. Masks were strongly recommended indoors for grades 7 through 12 since the first day of school. Masks have been required for pre-K through 12 for school transportation in accordance with the federal order. So there is still a CDC order in place that goes at least through January 18th that I'll talk about a little bit later. In the resolution, we talked about the guidance that was received from both the Ohio Department of Health and Franklin County Public Health in relationship to mask to stay, test to play. And again, I'll unpack that in just a couple more minutes. Socially distance to the greatest extent possible. And again, continue to encourage regular hand washing and sanitizing, really just as a good health strategy across our school campus, regardless of COVID. Those were the highlights of the resolution that was adopted by the Board of Education on November 15th. So as we look towards tonight, I want to review mask to stay, test to play, because we had several people asking questions about this after the last Board of Education meeting, including Board of Education members. So the mask to stay, test to play is from the Ohio Department of Health. It's technically recommendations for guidance that was put in place specific to schools as a result of the pilot that took place in Warren County that we unfortunately were not eligible to participate in at the time, despite my best advocacy. But statistically, it showed in the pilot, much like our results, that less than 3% of the students that were being forced into a quarantine situation were actually testing positive for COVID-19. So there were hundreds to thousands of kids across the state of Ohio that were being forced into a quarantine situation that did not result in the fact that the student ever tested positive for COVID-19. So mask to stay, test to play became an alternative that was put in place by the Ohio Department of Health on October 25th. It only applies to what happens at school. So if it doesn't happen at school, it doesn't apply as far as the alternative for quarantine requirements. So in mask to stay, if a student currently in our school district is identified as a close contact, he or she has the ability to remain in school today and continue to come to school if they're identified as a direct contact, if they wear a mask for 14 days after the last date of exposure, and they self-monitor for symptoms. Additionally, they have the eligibility to test through days 5 through 7 to remove the mask thereafter. And then one caveat that applies differently is the vaccine piece. We as a school district are not permitted to ask the parent if the student is vaccinated. This is where the difference is of what happens at school versus what happens in the community. So if a student is vaccinated and the parent self-reports that to the school district and the exposure did not happen at school, he or she would be eligible to continue to come to school under the current provisions from the Ohio Department of Health. This was put in place because we are not permitted by statute to ask the parent if the child's been vaccinated. The parent can choose to tell our nursing staff that John, Debbie, Mike, Phil, or Paul has been vaccinated, but we are not permitted to ask for that information. So mask to stay was put in place. Test to play is the second piece, and it's specifically to extracurricular activities. It was to try to help kids still have the ability to continue in their extracurricular activities and not be subjected to quarantine. So in Test to Play, if a team has an individual on their team that tests positive for COVID-19, then the team has the ability to access our COVID-19 test kits to actually take the test, to get the negative result, to then continue play without any restrictions. That's the purpose of Test to Play. Again, these were guidance and recommendations that were provided through the Ohio Department of Health in the interest of public safety. They are not requirements. They are technically guidance and recommendations that were given to the school district in the interest of public health. But again, this alternative mask to stay, test to play came as a result of the Warren County model. It only applies to what happens at school or on a school bus. The school bus is an extension of the classroom that's still being treated the same as extracurricular activities. If it's a birthday party on Saturday afternoon or a sleepover on Saturday night, this does not apply. That goes back to the previous recommendations from the Ohio Department of Health, and it is not mask to stay, test to play. Vaccine becomes the question that the health department's going to ask if it's outside of the school day, off of school property, at a private event. The questioning is all focused on vaccination. I've had several people ask me in relationship to information about vaccination rates across Franklin County. So we did get some new information in the latest CATS report to show us vaccine rates for ages 5 and above. So this is within your school district boundary. Every person over the age of 5 that's currently eligible for the vaccine, if they so choose. Currently, New Albany, within our geographic radius called a school district, 79% of the citizens ages 5 and over have elected to be vaccinated. And you can compare our rate to other communities. And I pulled just Franklin County so you could see it, but you also have to remember the population size and what that specifically means in different communities like Dublin City Schools, clearly with 15,000 kids, has a much higher populace than what New Albany Plain Local Schools does between Plain Township, the city of New Albany, and our portion of Columbus that is also part of our school district. But it's just data. It helps you understand what does it look like across other school districts because of what's in the CATS report. So in the CATS system, I'm happy to report we're at the bottom. So we actually have the lowest number. It's over 200, but it's still technically the lowest number of the number of cases per 100,000 as of last Thursday. So this is the current report that's available in the system, but we are actually at the bottom of the list this time. We've been number 4, number 5. We've trickled up, trickled down, but right now we have the lowest rate of all reporting school districts across Franklin County. And part of that goes back to, I believe, the high vaccination rate within our community at large for ages 5 and above. Geographically, this is the map. We're obviously, and I always say this, on the green side, we're the top right quadrant. So we're up here in this little corner for 43054. The dark green, and I know it's hard to read, this is Worthington, this is Dublin. So they've exceeded the 80th percentile threshold that I showed you on the previous chart for vaccination. We're hovering at 79. So if we cross the 80th percentile next week or this week, our colors should turn to the darkest green. But you can kind of see what the other communities look like across Franklin County. Everyone's somewhere between 60 and 100% across the board, with the exception of this quadrant right down here. The CATS data system, again, I referred to, these are our numbers over the course. Anything in excess of 100 says that you've exceeded for high transmission. We're not surprised. Daily proportion of cases has continued to drop. We have not seen any significant uptick in relationship to really post-holiday. We saw some initial things that were going on, but it really hasn't shown dramatic increases. We're hovering right around the 20th percentile. The reproduction number specifically for Franklin County on the CATS report right now is at 1.024. Which is interesting because I've always introduced this as the Yale, Harvard, Stanford study with the link to talk about the reproductive number. Ohio right now in their studies listed as 1.42 for the reproduction number, and Franklin County specifically is at 1.23. So their study is actually showing a higher reporting rate than what currently is available in the CAP system, specifically for Franklin County itself. Our NAPLS data, this is today, this is the dashboard as of this afternoon that Mr. Hood and the school nurses and our clinic aides have worked on. We had 1 staff positive today at the high school, and we had 4 student positives, 2 at the primary school and 2 at the high school. We are continuing to update the report specifically. The dashboard on our website is part of the reporting requirement for public transparency. So it is available on our website daily, typically late afternoon if all of the contact tracing has been completed. I've received that question several times in relationship to the dashboard. Some parents actually thought we had stopped contact tracing. We are required as a school district to contact trace. COVID-19 is a Class A communicable disease. As long as COVID is listed as a communicable disease, we are required under the current health regulations and Ohio Revised Code to actually contact trace and provide parent notification as part of that responsibility. I would tell you it's no different than pertussis or whooping cough, chicken pox, or other communicable diseases that we also have a responsibility for public reporting on. We also report our information to Franklin County Public Health. Mr. Hood fills out a form electronically that only goes to the Department of Health, and then once per week, our daily number that Mr. Hood submits, if there's a positive, that's when we report, shows up in an aggregate that goes to the Ohio Department of Health from Franklin County Public Health. So we don't report directly to the state. We report to the local health commissioner through Franklin County Public Health in an electronic form, and then it gets uploaded to the Ohio Department of Health. Sometimes there's a lag in the system because some people have tried to say, well, your numbers on your website don't match what I'm finding at the state, and it doesn't match here. It's just a lag in the reporting system. It's reported from the county once per week to the state. We report daily if there's a positive any type in the school district. This is just the December summary that shows you student versus staff to give you some understanding of what's going on specifically in the school district. So to date on 2021-22, there's 274 student positives within the school district, 50 that have been specifically for staff members. Shows you today's number and then the total number of kids that actually turned for informational purposes. So it shows you the breakdown by school building, our identified direct contacts. If a direct contact was specifically due to an exposure, down at the bottom in the bar graph, we show you classroom versus cafeteria versus school bus versus a family member, Eagle's Nest, if it was applicable for before and after school program, if it occurred outside of school, and then if it's not specified. So we've tracked this just to have some understanding of where the type of exposure might have actually taken place for our informational purposes. And then we also keep track of self-quarantine information, both for staff members as well as for students. So this is the breakdown in the blue-gray, depending on what your color scheme is on your computer. Our parents that have elected to self-quarantine. So for example, 21 at the ELC versus 35 students that were identified as close contact that actually came to school under mask to stay provisions during the month of December. And then you can see year-to-date totals in the bottom left-hand corner. For December, we've had 289 kids that were identified as a direct contact district-wide, and then year-to-date 2,359 kids that we've identified at the bottom. Mr. Darrow often asks me how many kids turned COVID positive during quarantine. So this is our updated graph that basically shows you from October 20th through December 13th, what that tracking looks like specifically at the building level. The orange is not specified. The green is a family member for really the result of the exposure. So dominantly, that is our number one in the school district, that the majority of students that have tested positive during quarantine were due to a family member's exposure. It was not due to exposure at school. And the track record that I've talked about previously at board meetings really is kind of still holding true, that once COVID is within the household and more than one person is positive within the household, typically the entire family, even if asymptomatic, ultimately ends up testing positive. Has been the track record that Mr. Hood and the nurses have seen. The COVID-related clinics goes up and down based upon the day of the week. Or what's specifically happening. So when you go back to what was happening around the holiday, we saw a spike, then it leveled back off and it dropped. We've had a slight incline recently because of current cases in the school district. But again, we're going to continue to have COVID positive or COVID related events in our school district regardless. It's just the reality. And all the health officials have made it clear, and I've said this candidly and politely before board meetings, COVID is not going to go away. COVID is among us, and we have to learn to live with COVID, because every health official still tells me, and most of the conversations that I frequent, that it's basically going to be here for the next 4 to 6 years. So I get we're 2 years in, but every health official or expert that I've listened to says it's probably at least 6 years. And we need to understand that really as a society and as a school district so that we can be prepared to be successful. As always, the guidance from Nationwide Children's Hospital, and these are their graphics, ultimately reinforced by the health department to try to help families understand how to do their symptom checks at home. We, again, because we're going into winter season, have to differentiate between the different types of things that look like COVID. Tonight's an infomercial because we have publicly advertised these kits. So it's the kit on the left. This is the old kit. It has a removable sliding cover on it. This kit is now technically going to be expired. If you have any of these at home, when you use this QR code and go online, they will immediately tell you it's no longer a valid test kit because the company that's administering this kit is no longer accepting this kit because they expire on December 24th. But that's this company. It's not Abbott. Abbott still believes that these test kits could be used. We have asked Franklin County Public Health and the Ohio Department of Health to figure that out. So for right now, we have secured the new test kit. How do you know it's new? There's no sliding cover that says do not remove or you're going to get in trouble. That's not on these kits. This is the new kit. It's a dark blue box still, looks very much like the other one, but the lot number on the back will now show that it doesn't expire until March. It was actually manufactured on March 3rd, 2021, and has a 1-year calendar life. According to Abbott, Abbott has told John Hood that we could still use these kits. The problem is you can't use the QR company that's actually administering the kit when you actually download it to go online. So if any families have this kit, they will not use it. You will wait online, and this has happened to people in our school district, unfortunately. You get through the registration process, you're in the queue, you're waiting for your appointment. They come on, they look at this, and then they tell you immediately it's an expired kit, and they hang up on you. Not good customer service, but that's what's happening. So anyone at home, if you have a removable sliding cover that says do not open and yelling at you, please don't use this. You can return it to the school district. We believe the kit underneath it is still valid. We're working with Abbott on that. We will resupply you with a kit that actually is valid in the event you would need it at home. And it has the same QR code on it, but it has a different expiration code on the back, and the company will not hang up on you. Because we're in the winter season, you have to differentiate between colds, flus, allergies, COVID, and RSV. This is the chart that Nationwide Children's Hospital still uses for infographic purposes. I talked earlier about the CDC and the recommendations are for federal mask order. The current order for school buses is through January 18th. Some people discovered over the weekend that the TSA has released new dates in March. The feds have not updated the guidance from the CDC. TSA put out a press release. The federal government and the CDC have not. We will wait for the federal government and the CDC to tell us if the mask order will or will not be extended beyond January 18th. TSA for air travel and other things has extended it until mid-March. That has not happened yet from the CDC. I'll update you when I know if that is or isn't happening. As always, anyone has questions related to COVID-19 for reporting purposes within their family or need help, please call the COVID-19 hotline and Mrs. Norton will be happy to accept or to assist you. As always, we're gracious for your continued willingness to work with us as a school district. I believe we truly are one team, one family, and it's together to keep our kids in school every single day where they belong with our classroom teachers, learning and succeeding as we continue to navigate the 2021-22 school year. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, entertain anything else that you want to tell me you want to change. If you have comments or if there's some action I need to take, I need to know what it is.
Questions or comments?
As usual, I have some comments. What I would love to change, Mr. Sawyers, is that this is the last board meeting where we spend time doing this. I think it's a distraction for the school. I think it's a distraction for kids. I think fundamentally it is harmful to kids. When I look at the last resolution and I look at the list of things, the short list of things that we are recommending or requiring, masks are going away for a requirement, so that's a good thing. So I'm glad that's finally happening. The strong recommendation to continue masking should go away. It is clear not only in this district, but it is clear around the country and across the world that they don't matter. They should stop being required, but we will follow federal law because we'll follow federal law. We should follow state law because we should follow the law. We should follow county law to the extent there is such. We should follow the law. We shouldn't do any more than that because it's harmful for kids. That includes the mask to stay, test to play. We should stop doing all. I agree with Dr. Bott that all of these additional measures serve only to distract from the school's mission and our statement of purpose. There is no evidence that they produce better outcomes for kids, and there's lots of evidence that they produce worse outcomes. So the sooner we move away from every single one of these things that is not required by law, the better off we will be, and most important, better off kids will be in this district because we will be able to focus on school. Every time a child comes to school and there's conversation about who got excluded from school for one reason or another, or they see kids in masks, or they see other people in masks, it reminds them that for the last 2 years, we have told children that they are a threat to others and that they themselves are at risk, and it's harmful because it's not true. So we need to stop doing this as soon as possible. The sooner the better. First of the year would be a great time to do that. So I would like that we consider making those changes. I would like that we make this, we should continue to collect the data because parents should know what's going on. They should be, parents who want to know what's going on in the classroom should easily be able to. I agree with Dr. Bott as well with regard to syllabus for classrooms. Parents should have ready access to the information. We should continue to collect this information. We should make it available to parents. We should do what we need to do to make sure parents know what's going on so that they can make good decisions for them and their children. But we should stop doing this stuff and spending time doing this because it's not good for kids. It's not helpful and it does not protect their health or safety.
So just to clarify, Superintendent Sawyers, you made the point that we are required to do the contact tracing. And it's because of the type of disease this is.
A communicable disease.
And were you done, Phil?
For now.
Okay. I did have a question on mask to stay, test to play. So when we're talking about parents volunteering information about being vaccinated, what happens when they share that information?
You mean within the school?
Let's do St. Louis. So if they.
It's not public information. It just informs the decision of what comes next as to what the school district can say to the parent, that your child can still continue to come to school because he or she has been vaccinated, or if the child hasn't been vaccinated, then here's the information available to you from Franklin County Public Health. Anything you want to add?
That remains asymptomatic.
Yeah, you have to be asymptomatic to stay.
To your question, just to clarify, so the contact tracing, to what degree are we required by order? And it's the same contact tracing we would do if somebody had the mumps, right?
Or whooping cough.
Or whooping cough or
tussis,
any other
whatever.
communicable disease.
We have a responsibility to provide public notice to anyone that was potentially exposed so that they have due diligence as a parent or family to understand what that means to their family unit and what action they choose to take to make an informed decision. But we have to give them notification according to the regulations under communicable disease.
And we should continue to do that. That's a valid health order. So we should continue.
Then
to do
it's
that.
the parent's responsibility to then make the decision. And we give them the information because that's what comes. It's a form letter that Mr. Hood and the nurses use that came from Franklin County Public Health. It's a template that all the school districts are using that goes to the parent and says, here's the information. That's if it happens at school. There's a different letter, John, if it's outside of school, correct? So the test to play, mask to stay piece that I talked about as an alternate only applies when something happens at school. Otherwise, they get the other letter because more often than not, it's the birthday party, the sleepover, the Saturday rec game. Those are all outside the school district. That's a different form letter that came from Franklin County Public Health.
And so can you walk through how they're treated differently?
John, do you want to come up and talk about it? And give two examples, one in school and one out of school.
Because to your point, Superintendent Sawyer, that is the majority of our experiences. We're getting positive cases from outside the school.
Yeah, so the positive case comes from outside of school, but the exposure as being a close contact to that positive case is taking place in school, which is really what Michael's talking about primarily. So we might have a positive case today that one case might produce 20 close contacts. And so it was because of class, it was because they sit with them at lunch, it could be a variety of situations. So the nice part about this study that was done in Southern Ohio was that they said it showed a low amount of transmission. And so we think kids can stay in school if they were considered to be a school close contact. The difference is if you're now at the sleepover on a Friday night, and it's not connected to school. There's been no research on that. There hasn't been any study that's really confirmed what should take place there. So Franklin County Public Health and Ohio Department of Health have this expectation then that you were close contact, you probably should quarantine just to make sure that you're not going to be transmitting to someone else. That's where this piece comes in, where it's awkward for us, where we're not really supposed to be asking you if you're vaccinated, but if you provide the information that says you're vaccinated, that allows you to continue to come to school if you were at the sleepover.
That you're asymptomatic.
I'm sorry?
Asymptomatic.
And as long as this is true for the mask to play stuff too, you have to remain asymptomatic during that whole time. That's where it's a little awkward as to whether you're a close contact from a school situation or a close contact from outside of school circumstance.
And if you are close contact outside of school, someone says, my child's vaccinated, do they have to come back with a mask on, or?
They have to remain masked for 14 days. You can shorten that by testing negative between days 5 and 7. So if you're on day 7, if you've tested negative between day 5 and 7, on day 7, you can stop wearing a mask. That's true of our mask to stay and test to play recommendations as well. For the kids who are at school that get to stay in school, they're supposed to be masking until they test negative on day 7.
The parent also retains the right to make a family unit decision based upon life circumstance in their household that they're going to self-quarantine regardless. And some of our families have elected that, and that's actually in the data that I showed you tonight. There's X number in each building that are choosing to self-quarantine for whatever reason in their household. Could be someone's immunocompromised within the household. They just don't want to take the chance. So they're making that decision as a family unit not to take advantage of, especially if it's a school exposure, because of the alternate that would be in place.
How does the identification of close contact differ for COVID than it does for, or does the identification differ for COVID than it does for whooping cough?
COVID's a little bit more specific. So whooping cough's not going to have the details of 6 feet for 15 minutes. It's the stuff that we found around
So
COVID.
what would we do for whooping cough?
Whooping cough tends to be more of a classroom
The whole
exposure.
classroom.
So whooping cough shows up in 3rd grade, Mrs. Smith's class, Mrs. Smith's whole class gets notified. You've been exposed to whooping cough. Start looking for these symptoms in your family because you've been exposed.
And they're allowed to come to school.
They're allowed to come to school as long as they're asymptomatic. But it's really the purpose of the letter, and the purpose of the letter for COVID is to just help you be vigilant. And the thing that we're finding about COVID is that we've got fatigue now because we've had so many letters that have come our way. It's just become a part of life. We're just assuming I'm going to get another letter this week saying we've been exposed somewhere, whereas pertussis doesn't happen very often, where you're like, oh my gosh, there's pertussis. I need to start looking for this cough with my child, or I need to look for hand, foot, and mouth disease, or whatever it might be.
But the goal to where John went is to reinforce your due diligence, that if you've slacked off on the morning symptoms check, start doing your symptoms check. Because there's potential. We're telling you, your child is a direct contact. There's a reason that you should be paying attention. If you haven't been doing everything really, really well, please start doing it for the next 14 days, because there's a real reason why you should be paying attention.
And I can confirm what Michael said earlier, that there is significant evidence of transmission within families within our district. It's traveling like wildfire through a
In
family.
the house.
And a little scary when it gets to grandparents and things like that are in some compromised situations. So it really is, that letter really does serve as a purpose to say, just be vigilantly watching for any potential symptoms.
And that's been, that sort of policy
been
has been in
required.
place for decades, essentially.
For communicable disease, yeah.
Yeah, and that makes good sense. What doesn't make good sense is the addition of the requirement to mask them afterward, because there is no evidence that that makes a difference.
So it's Ohio Department of Health recommendation.
But not in order.
It's not in order. I will just tell you candidly, the majority of our families have been compliant. Some have had follow-up conversations just to talk out loud about it. But at the end of the day, the family is the responsible party to make that decision. The school district is providing the information, and I'll just use it as an example. If John gets pushback from a specific parent, we call Franklin County Public Health, we inform Franklin County Public Health, and then it's Franklin County Public Health's responsibility to follow up with the family, because we don't have the authority. What you do have the authority for, I want to say this out loud, because I don't want anybody to think that we don't. If a student is in fact COVID-19 positive and you come to school, you are not staying at school. We have legal authority to remove you from school because you are posing a public health risk because you are confirmed positive.
Don't we have the same authority for other
We
communicable
do
diseases?
for whooping cough, pertussis, chicken pox, all of that. We have the authority to prohibit a child from coming to school. And in this case, and I'll just use my previous example, the health commissioner has the authority to issue a quarantine order to a family that prohibits their child from reporting to school if he deems it necessary based upon his investigation and circumstances of COVID-19.
Longstanding law, it all makes perfect sense.
Other questions or examples that you want from John? Is there anything else that would be helpful? Debbie, did they answer your question, school versus out of school?
Yes.
There is a difference between the two. And
Yeah.
our families are frustrated by that
Yeah.
because we have one set of rules for school because of the pilot that was done in Warren County. And the birthday parties and the sleepovers are a completely different set of rules because it did not happen in school.
Thank you, John.
I have another question on the federal policy with regard to transportation. What does the bus driver do if a child shows up and doesn't have their mask on?
Give them one.
What's that?
So and unfortunately,
Give them one.
it's a headache. We start with a gentle reminder and warning, and we hand them another mask, and we pass out masks every day. After the second and third reminder, we typically do a bus incident referral for basically filling it out from the driver. We contact the parent, we ask for compliance because it's a federal order. We don't really want to get into the discipline game because you're refusing to wear a mask. However, because of the federal order, we can choose to impose discipline, and candidly, the discipline thus far is we remove your right for X number of days to ride the bus. We take you off of the privilege of riding the bus. You're making a choice, and I don't want to get into suspension and everything else. We're choosing to basically say, Mom, this is the last time. Dad, this is the last time. Grandma, this is the last time. If it happens again, your child's off the bus for a week. You figure out how to get your kid back and forth to school. But that doesn't happen on offense number 1.
Overall, students are really compliant.
Yes. And unfortunately, the ones that aren't are typically frequent flyers. It's just an ongoing conversation with the child. I mean, sometimes it's innocent to start with, they just legitimately forget. And I'm expecting an influx of that in January because we're going to be confusing kids. You have one set of rules for the school day, and then you get on this bus. So before you get on the bus at your bus stop in the morning, and when you get out of school in the afternoon, before you get on the bus again, you have to wear a mask as long as there's a federal order. Otherwise, we're liable as a school district for non-enforcement, and it jeopardizes federal funding. We can't do that. Not that we receive millions of dollars, but our students with special needs, we cannot jeopardize federal funding.
Thank you for that additional information.
Any other questions, comments? Number of board policy items, Sawyers.
So Board of Education members, these are second reading. I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have relative to them. I will remind you that just because we update policies and there's a lot of them on this list, you can always change them in the future. So if there is something that you want to revisit at any point in time, you're welcome to do that. We just need to have a conversation and I can put it back in the queue. But these are updated based upon recent changes in federal or state legislation to incorporate those changes into policy.
Questions on anything? All right, we'll see those later. Now, treasurer's items. I need a motion, please.
So moved.
Second, Kalinowski, and second by Mr. Bush. Ms. Jenkins.
Thank you. Just have the monthly financial statement today for you to approve. We are still over in revenue. We've received more, about $1.1 million than we expected at this point. The majority of that is between real estate tax and income tax sharing with the city of New Albany. And I think the real estate is really more a matter of timing and split than actually being that it'll be that high at the end of the year. The income tax sharing, I actually met with the city finance director today just to kind of have a conversation because it's been a little bit higher to see what's happening there. And she just said that 2021 was actually a better year than what they had expected. So I do expect that we will continue to receive more this year than what they had originally projected for us to receive. What I do want to caution us in thinking though is they have had, I think she said, 4 companies who are figuring out the work from home versus work in the building, and that would determine who's getting that income tax. So it might not be the city of New Albany because they may not live in the city of New Albany. So future years, we're going to have to really kind of pay attention to income tax sharing.
Will you clarify that real quick? So under the current tax code, if someone is working from home, let's say they work at A&F, but they're working from home and home isn't in New Albany, they're taxed differently than if they went into the office?
Well, yes, they're taxed based on where they live, not based on where they're working.
This is going to become a big issue for suburban communities.
Absolutely.
It's huge.
Because, yeah. So.
And that's, I mean, this is your
No,
specialty area.
that's right. I mean, it's actually something we got to consider going forward with the tax payment policy, because if the income taxes sharing is not going to be there in the tax abatement, so it's something that's all changed. It's been upside down in the last 2 years.
The other part of that too is that a lot of the companies that all of the companies that we receive any income tax sharing with is part of an abatement agreement. So they're still also the city is still working through how does that impact, because they all have certain income and employment goals that they have to meet to continue the abatement. So they're also working through that with companies as well, but definitely something we're looking into.
They may employ the same number of people, but if they're not reporting to work at that company, they're reporting to work from home. So they may hit their targets, but we still get less money.
That's right.
But there's the other side of the coin, right? For those people that work downtown that aren't going downtown anymore, that reside in New Albany.
Correct, but we don't get, well, it depends. Yeah, you're right. So it could be if they work for those companies. So we don't know what to look at going forward.
How long before we have visibility into this, or will our visibility always be retrospective?
It's usually retrospective because usually it takes about 18 months to fully collect income tax once it gets started. So I think it'll be a little bit retrospective anytime. I don't know what the city's using to figure that out.
Well, and you probably know this better. I think part of the issue, you talk about people who work here or who live here but work downtown. This
Going to the city, I'm sorry. Go.
No, I was gonna say that the companies are the ones that are filling out these forms, right? So they're gonna be just filling it out for their location where they are, correct? Or are they responsible to do this now for all of the municipalities where these people are living and working?
Let me try to go ahead.
Well, it depends on the company. So just
Right.
because people are here and they work downtown, the company is not here, so not part of the abatement. So the city
Yeah.
might still receive the income tax, but we wouldn't receive income tax sharing because it's only the companies that are part of those abatements that we share the income tax with.
The city will do better on me because I'm working from home in New Albany more than I'm used to.
Right.
But that won't help the schools because that's income tax to the city. Unless, to your point, we're a part of an abatement agreement, which we're not.
So the city of New Albany is better off.
I don't know whether they're coming out.
No, for you, in your case,
In my case, yes.
just your specific
Right,
case.
That's right, but there's no sharing of that income with the district. In Abercrombie's case, there would be sharing of that in lieu of the tax abatement dollars.
The only income tax sharing that we receive are only on the companies in New Albany that are part of an abatement agreement with the city of New Albany.
And I think the bottom line,
And
sorry.
And that is because that's part of the agreement. So if we're not receiving real estate tax because they abated it, part of that agreement was City of New Albany will share part of the income tax with the district to offset that. But we don't just receive part of the income tax that the city collects from everybody else.
I think the bottom line is these changes introduce a new variable, a new unknown variable that we can be fairly predictive on taxes because they follow a pattern, but the pattern is now going to change. So I think that's the bottom line is we have to be very thoughtful and cautious about our projections going out more than a couple of years because we just don't know.
And I don't know how soon they'll know about the 4 companies. She didn't tell me the names, but the 4 companies that are working through this, I don't know how soon we'll know that or what their plan is going forward, but she'll keep me in my foot. And then on the expenditure side, we still are running under budget in all areas. We still don't have detail from the Department of Education, so that purchase services line that is $800,000 under budget, I won't know that for sure until we get that. And now it's projected to be January before we have those details. But, and that is due to the way they're now funding community schools and the John Peterson scholarships. They're now direct funding that, where we had expected to have to pay that because it used to be a deduction from our state foundation formula. So that's why there's that offset. The other large one is capital outlay. We're $770,000 under budget there. We only spend those dollars. That's for anything that's over $500 or last 5 years. So if we don't need to spend that money, we don't spend that money. And for most of the really big projects, we're using permanent improvement funds. But overall, we're in good shape financially. Happy to answer any questions. Any more questions?
Anything else?
Vice President Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Mr. Darrow.
Yes.
Mr. Newmaw.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. Now, entertain a motion, please, on superintendent's items A through D.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Darrow, second by Mr. Newmoff. Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan, members of the Board of Education. Letter A for personnel, standard employee action items pursuant to the negotiated agreements or ORC for personnel action. I will highlight that we have a second individual who's announced mid-year resignation for retirement purposes as a bus driver. So we will continue to build that list of individuals that have announced retirements to celebrate them later in the spring towards the end of the school year. Everything else is really a standard employee action item pursuant to contract. Letter B for general business this evening, in addition to the field trips for students, we approved the new courses for New Albany High School for the 2022-23 school year that Dr. Hamilton, Mr. Kramer, and Mrs. Dancheski previously spoke about at Board of Education meeting, as well as the program of studies. For 2022-23, that leads us into January, the start of the registration process and everything that starts to begin happening to plan simultaneously for the next school year while we finish strong the current school year. Letter B also includes action item number 6 for approval of roof replacement resolution. Ms. Jenkins and I can answer specific questions, but there's a resolution presented this evening not to exceed $2.4 million from the Permanent Improvement Fund for rooftop replacements at the Early Learning Center, the middle school cafeteria, and the annex building that we're currently sitting in. We're moving this forward based upon, we went through the competitive bid process, purchasing through a co-op, so we're getting the best pricing possible. We want to process this. We're not going to hold off until we typically bring other things forward, because we do believe there's going to be a supply chain issue in getting the shingles. So the sooner we get in the pipeline for the intent that we actually want to purchase the shingle material, the more likely it's possible. So the contractors have availability for installation. That's not the issue. Their worry is, can we physically get shingles for the Early Learning Center, the middle school cafeteria, and this building's flat top, so it's a little bit different. But we don't know if that's going to happen. If they never arrive, then this will get pushed forward, but we at least want to chance the opportunity. We have the money built into the PI budget to do the rooftop replacements like we've been doing annually to protect our capital assets, but that's the purpose of the resolution tonight. Anything you'd like to add? Letter C for board policy, again, second readings and recommendations for adoption. Board of Education can modify them at any time that you so choose. And letter D, as always, we're very grateful for the generosity of those that donate and share their time and treasure to our school district from a philanthropic perspective, and tonight is no exception. Several of the donations were specifically for our esports team at the high school. So that's fairly new. It's a club at the high school that's been formed. It's actually currently being evaluated by the Ohio High School Athletic Association as a potential future varsity sport. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Darrow.
Yes.
Mr. Newmaw.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Vice President Kalinowski.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Let's entertain a motion for adjournment.
So
Mr. Darrow. Second by Mr. Bush. Roll call, please.
Mr. Darrow. Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Mr. Newmaw.
Yes.
Vice President Kalinowski.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes, we are adjourned. Next meeting will be our organizational meeting on January 10th.